The desert sun was slipping behind the red cliffs of Sedona, painting the sky in streaks of fire and gold. Strings of fairy lights glowed against the sandstone, and the sound of a string quartet carried across the warm evening air. Guests clinked champagne glasses, laughter rising like the desert wind. It should have been a perfect wedding night. But perfection shattered when my new son-in-law leaned close to me, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the sand, his eyes gleaming with something far colder than love. Ethan Caldwell's voice dropped to a whisper, smooth but sharp enough to slice through the music. $55,000, he said, smiling as if posing for a camera. Pay it, or vanish from our lives forever. The words struck me harder than the desert heat. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. But then my daughter, my Lila, radiant in her ivory gown, lifted her champagne flute and added with casual cruelty, "Or you know, Mom, enjoy the quiet of a retirement home. Your choice." Her tone was light, almost playful, but her eyes held no softness. Around us, the party continued, unaware. To anyone watching, we were a picture of family celebration. Only I knew that the conversation was a knife pressed to my throat. I blinked slowly, letting the sting pass, my fingers tightening around the thin glass stem. This was my daughter, the same little girl I once carried barefoot through a rainstorm. The same child who used to whisper, "Is this an adventure, Mommy?" as we ran from the shadows of our old life. And now she stood here, side by side with a man who believed he could buy my silence, buy my absence, with a demand wrapped in a smile. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. Instead, I lifted my glass to my lips, took a measured sip of the bitter champagne, and let the silence stretch long enough for both of them to feel it. Then, in a voice quiet but steady, I whispered 4 words that I had been carrying in my heart for weeks. "You forgot one thing." The air seemed to shift. A breeze rose from the canyon floor, catching the edge of my shawl, as if the desert itself had leaned in to listen. Ethan's perfect smile faltered just enough for me to see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Lila's hand trembled on her glass, a tiny ripple in her polished facade. They didn't know yet, but those words were not a bluff. They were a promise. I had not come to this wedding unprepared. I hadn't spent years sacrificing, building, and protecting, only to be discarded like a piece of desert dust. I had built a plan as carefully as a mason lays stone, one layer at a time, waiting for this very moment. And tonight, under the glow of the Sedona sunset, the first crack had already appeared in their porcelain world. "You forgot one thing," I repeated softly, letting the wind carry the words toward the horizon. Then I excused myself with a polite smile, as if I were simply heading to powder my nose. What they didn't realize was that the storm they had summoned had already begun. I was 27, the night I decided to burn the bridge behind me. Tucson was drowning in a summer storm, the kind of desert rain that didn't fall in drops but in sheets, slamming against the cracked windows of our apartment. The swamp cooler rattled in the corner, pushing hot, damp air into a room that smelled of stale beer and anger. Derek lay sprawled on the couch, half-empty bottle still clutched in his hand, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a drunk sleep. His rage had finally burned itself out. My cheek still stung from the blow he'd landed earlier, but it wasn't the bruise that broke me. It was the sound I didn't hear. In the doorway, my little girl stood barefoot in her pajamas, hair plastered to her forehead from crying earlier. 4 years old, clutching a ragged teddy bear missing one button eye. She wasn't sobbing now. She wasn't even frowning. Her eyes were wide, watchful, too old for her tiny face, and silent. That silence was worse than Derek's fists, because I knew she had already learned the rule of our home. Don't cry, don't speak, don't make it worse. She had learned that silence meant safety. And that was the moment something inside me hardened. I didn't think. I moved. My hands knew before my mind did. I pulled an old duffel bag from the closet, the one Derek never noticed. I stuffed in 2 pairs of pajamas, her little sneakers, my work uniform from the diner, a change of clothes. At the bottom, I slid in the hollowed-out Bible my grandmother had left me. Inside was every tip I had scraped together over months. $237 was in wrinkled bills. My emergency lifeline. I crouched in front of Lila and cupped her damp cheeks. "Are we going on an adventure, Mommy?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Yes, baby," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "The biggest adventure of all." I lifted her into my arms. She wrapped herself around me like she had been waiting her whole life for that moment. The rain hammered us as we slipped into the night. My heart pounded, every shadow a threat, every lightning flash a spotlight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting Derek to lurch out of the doorway, roaring. But he never stirred. We walked 4 blocks in the downpour before I saw the neon glow of the Greyhound station. My shoes were soaked, my hair plastered to my scalp. But I stepped up to the counter, voice steady. "2 tickets," I said. "Flagstaff." The woman behind the glass barely looked at me, just slid the tickets across. That small mercy nearly undid me. We boarded, and I pressed Lila against me on the cracked vinyl seat, her tiny body shivering in my lap. Outside, Tucson blurred into darkness, the rain washing away the life we left behind. I didn't know what waited at the end of the road. A couch at a friend's apartment, maybe. A chance. A crack of light. But as the bus rumbled north, and Lila's breathing slowed against my chest, I knew one thing with perfect clarity: we were never going back. Flagstaff was colder than I expected. Even in late summer, the night air bit through the thin fabric of my diner uniform, and the tiny studio I managed to rent smelled of mildew and smoke. It was a one-room box above a laundromat, walls stained yellow from years of other people's lives, the radiator clanking like a wounded animal. But it had a lock on the door, and inside those 4 walls, no one raised a hand to me or my child. That made it enough. I found work the only place willing to hire a woman with tired eyes and no references. A roadside diner off Route 66. From 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, I poured coffee for truck drivers and students, the smell of bacon grease soaking into my hair. At night, after leaving Lila with the kind old woman next door, I scrubbed offices in downtown Flagstaff, vacuuming carpets, emptying trash, wiping away fingerprints from glass doors until my knees ached. The days bled together. Coffee pots, mop buckets, bus rides home in the dark, my hands cracked from soap, my back stiff from bending. But when I opened the door and saw Lila asleep on our pull-out bed, her teddy clutched under her chin, peace washed over me. Safe was worth the exhaustion. Years slipped by that way. Lila grew fast, her laughter returned, her eyes softened. She devoured books from the public library, read them aloud in her small clear voice, filling our cramped room with stories bigger than either of us. I lived for those nights. When she was 18, a letter came with the bold crest of the University of New Mexico. I can still see the way her hands shook as she tore it open, the way her face lit up like the first sunrise after a storm. "I got in, Mom," she shouted, spinning across the peeling linoleum, her acceptance letter held high like a trophy. I clapped and cried and laughed with her. But when she went to bed, I sat at the table staring at that letter, the numbers swimming in my vision. Tuition, housing, books, even with her partial scholarship. The cost loomed like a mountain. Fear pressed against my ribs, but I made myself a promise she would not feel that fear. The next morning, I took on another job, stocking shelves at a small grocery store on weekends. My body broke in new ways, aching wrists, calloused palms, feet blistered from endless hours on linoleum floors. I carried on because mothers carry on. Sometimes I caught glimpses of myself in the diner's greasy window, hair pulled back, skin sallow, uniform stained. I looked older than 35, but Lila was thriving. She studied, joined clubs, even landed internships. Every phone call was filled with her plans, her excitement. I drank those words like water. I reminded myself over and over, exhaustion was temporary, but the future I was building for her, that would last forever. The day Lila graduated, I thought my heart would burst. She stood tall in her crimson cap and gown, honor cords draped across her shoulders, her smile brighter than the desert sun. I clapped until my hands ached, tears spilling freely, because this was the moment every long shift, every blister, every sleepless night had been for. My daughter had made it. After the ceremony, we ate tacos from a food truck parked near campus. She barely touched her food, her mind already racing toward the future. "Mom," she said, her eyes glowing, "I've found it. The storefront, small but perfect. It's in Old Town Scottsdale, right on a street with boutiques and cafes. Exposed brick, big windows, hardwood floors. I can see it all. The displays, the designs, the brand. I know it'll work." Her voice was trembling with excitement, but also with hesitation. I felt the weight of the question before she asked it. "The thing is," she continued, "I need help with the startup money. 95,000. I know it's a lot. I wouldn't ask if it weren't my dream." The number struck me like a fist. 95,000 might as well have been 9 million. My savings were thin, my paycheck stretched to cover rent and groceries. But there was one account I had guarded all these years, my retirement fund. It wasn't much by most standards, but every month I had tucked away a little, determined to give myself some dignity in old age. That fund was supposed to be my safety net. I went to see Angela Perez the next morning. Angela had been my friend since high school, a woman who had slept on my couch once when her own marriage had fallen apart. Now she was a paralegal at a respected law firm in Phoenix, and she met me with coffee and quiet concern. "You're really going to do this?" she asked, scanning the papers I slid across her desk. "Margaret, that's your future." "My future," I said, steadying my voice, "is hers." Angela tapped her pen against the desk, thinking. Then she pulled out an extra packet of documents. "If you're going to do this, you're not just handing her money. You're protecting both of you. You'll retain 51% ownership. That way, if something goes wrong, you have legal control." I frowned. "I don't want control." "It's her dream, exactly," Angela said firmly. "But dreams need anchors, Margaret. Sign these, and you'll both be safe." 3 days later, I met Lila in a small cafe near the storefront. She was already calling hers. I handed her the papers and the check. She barely glanced at the legal documents, too busy sketching window displays in the margins of a notebook. She signed without hesitation, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this." When the boutique opened 3 months later, the air was filled with the smell of fresh paint and cheese platters served on borrowed trays. Lila stood in the center, radiant in a cobalt dress, welcoming friends, professors, and a scattering of local business owners. I lingered at the back, clapping softly, content to let her shine, because this wasn't my story anymore. It was hers. Or so I believed. At first, the boutique grew slowly. A handful of customers wandered in each day, curious about the new shop tucked between a wine bar and a yoga studio. Lila worked long hours, arranging window displays until midnight, answering emails herself, sketching new designs in the margins of receipts. I helped quietly, sweeping the floor after closing, unpacking boxes, balancing books when she was too tired to look at numbers. She called me her silent partner, though never when anyone else was around. Then came the shift. It started with a young woman named Marissa, an influencer from Phoenix who had stumbled into the boutique one Saturday afternoon. She tried on a pale blue dress, snapped a photo for Instagram, and tagged the store with a glowing caption. By the next morning, a line curled down the block. People wanted to be part of whatever Marissa had blessed with her post. Lila sold out in a single afternoon. Within weeks, local magazines were writing about her as a rising star in Arizona fashion. Other influencers began stopping by. Business boomed, and Lila's name became a brand. I watched with pride swelling in my chest. She was glowing, radiant in interviews, always speaking with confidence I had once only dreamed she'd have. But as the spotlight grew brighter, my shadow lengthened. One evening, I arrived earlier than usual, carrying takeout in a paper bag. Through the glass, I saw her laughing with a woman who looked like a wealthy client. I didn't want to interrupt, so I lingered near the racks, pretending to browse. The woman asked, "How did you manage all this right out of college? It's incredible." And Lila, without hesitation, smiled and said, "I built it from nothing, just hard work and a clear vision. No one handed me anything." Her words were light, but they sliced through me sharper than any knife. I stood frozen, bag clutched in my hand, heart pounding. She hadn't forgotten. I knew she hadn't. She had chosen to erase me. I slipped out quietly, leaning against the cool brick outside as my chest tightened. That was the night I realized I was no longer part of her story. Not forgotten, erased. Still, I tried to be understanding. Success changes people, I told myself. Maybe she just wanted to look independent. But the excuses crumbled when I began noticing things I couldn't explain. Bank statements revealed large withdrawals from the business account. Invoices that should have been paid were delayed. Receipts appeared for things unrelated to the boutique, luxury hotels, weekend trips, and high-end electronics. Lila had never lived lavishly before. And then there was Ethan. He started showing up more often, always in tailored shirts, always with ideas about scaling and expanding into new markets. I watched him charm Lila with words she repeated like scripture. Whenever I asked questions about the boutique's finances, she brushed me off with a smile. Too polished to be real. The unease in my chest grew heavier with every passing week. I had built my life from nothing before. I could sense when cracks were forming. And though she didn't see it, I knew. Something dangerous had already begun to seep into her dream. Ethan Caldwell looked through the boutique like he already owned it. He leaned against the counter, speaking in smooth tones about investors and scaling, tossing around phrases like strategic positioning and real estate leverage. At first I thought he was just showing off, but then I saw the way Lila's eyes followed him, the way she echoed his words as if they were gospel. One evening, after closing, I found a crumpled sheet of paper in the trash, Ethan's handwriting scrawled across it. At the top it read, "Projected expansion, boutique, capital funnel." My stomach tightened as I read. It was a plan, not for the boutique, but for a property venture in Nevada. The boutique wasn't the end game. It was the cash cow, and Lila, my daughter, was his willing accomplice. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the apartment, the words on that page burning into my mind. Had all my years of sacrifice been reduced to this? To fuel a stranger's gamble in the desert? A week later, the truth sharpened its edge. Leela left her laptop open at the boutique while she ran to the back room. I shouldn't have looked, but something in me knew I had to. On the screen was an email from Ethan. "After the wedding, everything will be easier. Push her for $55,000 more. That way we can close on the Reno project. Once it's finalized, creating distance won't be difficult." Push her, distance. Those words slammed into me like a blow. He wasn't just using her, he was teaching her to use me. I closed the laptop and stood frozen, my heart hammering. That night I called Angela. My voice trembled, but my words were steady. "I need to know exactly what my rights are as majority owner." Angela didn't hesitate. "With 51%, you can initiate a full audit. You can freeze accounts, block new contracts, and reclaim control. If Ethan's funneling money, he won't be able to hide it." "But Margaret," her voice softened, "are you ready for what that means? It will destroy your relationship with Lila." I pressed the phone harder against my ear. Silence stretched before I whispered, "Maybe she destroyed it already." Angela sighed. "Then you need a plan. Not anger, not impulse, strategy." And so we began, in Angela's cluttered home office. Surrounded by legal pads and coffee mugs, we built what we quietly called the Storm Plan. Every document was drafted, every trigger prepared. All it would take was my word to unleash it. But I refused to act out of bitterness, not yet. I folded the plan away like a weapon locked in a drawer. I told Angela, "I won't bove unless they force me. There has to be a final line," she asked. "And what will that line be?" I didn't answer. Not then. But in my chest, I already knew. The moment they tried to put a price tag on my love, the storm would break. The sun was sinking low over Sedona, draping the red cliffs in molten gold. Strings of lights twinkled against the gathering dusk, and the sound of laughter floated on the desert wind. To anyone watching, it was the perfect wedding reception. To me, it was a stage set for betrayal. Ethan found me near the edge of the dance floor, champagne glass in hand, his smile dazzling for the cameras, but hollow underneath. He leaned in close, his cologne sharp in the desert air. $55,000, he murmured, voice smooth as polished stone. "Pay it or vanish." "This is your last chance." Lila glided over, her gown trailing across the sand. She slipped her arm through his and added lightly, "Or a retirement home, Mom. Quiet, peaceful, far away. Doesn't that sound nice?" Her laughter chimed like silver, but her eyes held no warmth. For a heartbeat, I felt the sting of tears pressing against my eyes. My own daughter, my flesh and blood. But then the years of exhaustion, of sacrifice, of being erased from her story, hardened into something else. Clarity. I smiled, slowly, deliberately. I lifted my glass. "You forgot one thing," I whispered. Ethan's brow furrowed. Lila's lips parted, confusion flickering in her eyes. But I didn't wait for their questions. I set down my glass, smoothed the edge of my shawl, and walked away as though heading to powder my nose. In truth, I crossed the wooden boardwalk leading toward the dunes. The desert air cooled against my skin as I pulled my phone from my clutch. My fingers trembled only once before I typed the words Angela and I had agreed upon weeks ago. Sandstone time. I hit send. 7 minutes. That was all it took. I returned along the outer path of the reception. Unseen, among the clusters of laughing guests, the unraveling had already begun. First, the wedding coordinator approached Ethan's parents, placing a sealed envelope into his father's hand. His face darkened as he read. One by one, more envelopes appeared at the tables. Investors, board members, silent partners, all holding the same words: notification of immediate audit, asset freeze, investigation into unauthorized transfers. Phones buzzed as automated emails hit inboxes, locking access to boutique accounts and contracts. Ethan's father rose from his chair, his napkin falling to the sand. Fury carved deep lines into his face as he strode across the reception toward his son. Guests began to whisper, confusion rippling like a wave. Lila's phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her face drained of color. She turned and saw me standing at the edge of the lawn. Her voice cracked as she hurried to me. "Mom, what's happening? Everyone's getting these insane messages about the boutique. Vendors are panicking." I met her gaze, calm as the desert night. Not insane, accurate. "I'm exercising my right as majority owner." Ethan stormed over, jaw clenched, the smooth mask gone. "What have you done?" he hissed. I didn't flinch. "I've protected what I built. Did you think I wouldn't notice the missing funds, the unauthorized investors, or that you wouldn't leave a trail?" His father was shouting now, waving the envelope in Ethan's face. While guests circled, murmurs rising. The perfect facade of the wedding was crumbling. Lila's hand shook as she reached for me. "Mom, please, fix this. Everything we've worked for is at stake." I looked at her, my heart aching one last time. "Everything I worked for," I said softly. And in that moment, I knew. The storm had broken, and nothing would ever be the same. I left before the music stopped. The desert night was cool against my skin, the sand soft beneath my bare feet. Once I slipped off my heels. Behind me, voices rose in panic. Ethan's father demanding answers, investors calling lawyers, Lila crying out my name. But none of it reached me. For the first time in years, I felt light. Angela was waiting where the parking lot met the canyon road, her old sedan idling, headlights cutting through the dark. She didn't ask questions when I slid into the passenger seat. She just placed a folder on my lap. "It's done," she said gently. "The accounts are frozen. The investors know the truth. And your new papers, your business license in Prescott, is ready." I stared out at the cliffs, glowing faintly under the moon. "Then it's time." We drove north in silence, the desert stretching endless around us. I thought about Lila, her laughter as a child, her small arms clutching me that rainy night in Tucson, the hope I had built every sacrifice upon. I thought about Ethan's smug smile as he tried to put a price on my love. And I realized I wasn't leaving only a wedding behind. I was leaving behind a lifetime of being valued only for what I could give. Weeks later, in Prescott, I turned the key in the lock of a small storefront. Sunlight poured through wide windows into empty shelves, waiting to be filled. It wasn't grand, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, built not on sacrifice, but on peace. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood. Family isn't the ones who demand your silence or your savings. Family is the ones who honor your scars, who see your worth without a price tag. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, not with anger, but with peace.